when the Toronto Police Chief Mark Sanders said that I know for a fact that some suspects could be watching, do you think that was some kind of head game where he was basically taunting the family, saying maybe it was one of you guys?
I mean, there's pages of people that wanted to kill Barry. He was specifically saying, okay, we know it's one of the family members, especially the direct offspring. They have a big incentive to see their father and mother dead. I honestly kind of think it was more of a bluff.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we're all just trying to survive in a rough world.
So, Carm, it's no surprise to you or our lovely audience that for literally probably close to a year now, we've been covering in depth the Dan Markel murder case and so many twists and turns. But you know what we do know about the Dan Markel murder case?
Who is in jail?
We know who basically did it for the most part, right? We know Charlie Adelson is going on trial. Katie Magbanua is in prison for life. Sigfredo Garcia is in prison for life. We know Luis Rivera copped the plea deal. There is another fascinating case, ironically from Dan Markel's hometown of Toronto, Canada. Barry and Honey Sherman, Carmela. Now, you told me you at one point you refused to do this because you didn't want to capture the corner of Jewish true crime, but you've sort of softened your stance, Carm. How come?
Because two is not all.
That's a great answer. Great answer.
Do you want to help my son? His company, Content Partners Media, specializes in brand video and content creation for innovative companies and others. Please go to www.contentpartnersmedia.com and hire him. I repeat, please go to www.contentpartnersmedia.com.
Let the audience have a little background about all this, and then we're going to dive into it with a host of a podcast called Talk Murder to Me. We'll get to him in just a second. But the backstory real quick. So his name is Barry Sherman. He was a Canadian businessman and philanthropist who was chairman and CEO of Apotex Inc. That is a generic pharmaceutical company. He had an estimated net worth of $3.2 billion at the time of his death. This is according to Forbes. The 12th wealthiest man in Canada. He couldn't even crack the top 10. Now, he's a University of Toronto graduate with a doctorate in engineering from a little school called MIT, Carm, where your granddaughter graduated from, and she's 23 and has a gazillion job offers and makes way more money than me already, but we won't go into that. After graduating from MIT, Barry Sherman started in the pharmaceutical business. Now, this is important. The estate of his uncle Louis Lloyd Winter, remember that name, Winter, let him run a thing called Empire Laboratories. I know this is convoluted, but if you pay attention, you will follow. This eventually led Sherman to form Apotex. So he got his start with Winter at Empire Laboratories, starts Apotex. He earned a reputation among both competitors and government regulators in Canada for extreme combativeness, often including litigation. Sherman's 4 cousins, this Winter family, were supposed to have received 5% stakes in Empire. They later sued Barry Sherman unsuccessfully over the sale of the company. Now, he had a wife named Honey, who he married in 1971. Believe it or not, this December, just a few days away, will mark the 5th anniversary of the murders of this generic pharmaceutical titan and his wife. They were killed in their suburban Toronto home on the evening of Wednesday, December 13th, 2017. Since then, there has not been a very strong lead in this case at all. Their bodies were posed in a macabre position, found 36 hours later from December 13th. So essentially on December 15th, the bodies were discovered by a real estate agent on the deck of the basement swimming pool. They had been hanged and strangled with belts. Now, initially, investigators from the Toronto Police Service considered the deaths a murder-suicide. It was a conclusion that was widely disputed in the media. The Toronto Star has been all over the story. Now, in April 2019, the police said that they had a working theory of the case and an idea of what happened. And as of today, the investigation is active and ongoing. We are joined now, cordially, by Jon Perry, as I said, host of the wildly successful Talk Murder to Me podcast. Jon, how's it going, man?
Pretty good. How about you guys? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So you talk murder pretty much every day. How is this case stacked up compared to other cases you're doing? And are you surprised that 5 years have gone by and basically we haven't heard of any arrests and no real substantive leads thus far?
This is actually one of the cases that I often think about because a billionaire couple gets murdered and still, like you said, 5 years later, no suspects at all. You would think being that wealthy, this would already be solved. And at the time that this went on, you have to remember that the Toronto police, they were also chasing another man that was a serial killer, Bruce McArthur. So that was taking some of their time as well. When I did this case, I literally could not believe it. And I didn't even see that it was all that popular either.
And that's a great point, because the other case that we've really profiled on our podcast is the Dan Markel murder case. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a FSU law professor who went to Harvard undergrad in Harvard Law, who was murdered by hitmen in his driveway. And there's been a dateline to 2020. Wondery, the large podcast company, got 30 million downloads on a show they did, a series they did about Dan Markel. You'd think that this case, maybe because it's in Canada, is not getting quite the media attention. And I'm actually stunned by it, but we're talking about one of the wealthiest people on planet Earth, the 12th wealthiest guy in all of the great country of Canada. Toronto homicide detectives have recently said that the case is active and ongoing. They have, quote unquote, numerous persons of interest and a theory of what happened, but they won't say who those people of interest are and what the theory is. And we're going to get into some of that now. Carm, you're a big fan of real estate. They were trying to sell their home, right?
Yeah,
and
they were building a new dream home.
A dream home. And it's funny because Barry Sherman was apparently stingy. He didn't drive a very fancy car. He drove a Mustang, a Ford Mustang. You know, things that he could be driving the Rolls Royce, Carm, that I see here in Miami all the time, but he chose not to. But nevertheless, they had the house up for sale. A real estate agent named Elise Stern, obviously a nice Jewish woman, Carm, was showing the home when she discovered the bodies. Again, for weeks, I think up to 6 weeks, they were looking at it as a murder-suicide. The problem was, Carm, when they found the bodies, belts were strapped around their necks, and they were hanging from railings in their indoor pool. It doesn't take either a rocket scientist or a detective, Carm, to figure out that you couldn't have killed someone, and then really, it just didn't make a lot of sense. Carm, what did you make of that? Of the fact
I think they studied it and they decided it was not murder-suicide, so it was murder, and there were so many people that could have done the murder. That's the problem.
It's
very, very hard to narrow it down who did it when there are so many people who potentially could do it.
Yeah. And so, John, for 6 weeks, it was investigated as a murder-suicide. Now, the Toronto Star has led all the reporting on this, and as a former news reporter, I like to give credit where credit is due. There's a guy at the Toronto Star named Kevin Donovan, and he is their star investigative reporter, and he's been all over this case, and he has called it a domino effect with the investigation. He says that because it was investigated as a murder-suicide and police weren't all over it, video from a homeowner across the road, something as simple as that, was ignored. DNA and fingerprints were not collected in a timely fashion. He says that the wrong leads were followed. Even the lead investigator on this for this crime did not visit the scene personally for a few days. What do you make of that, John? I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? Especially a high-profile case.
The murder-suicide theory, it would be the first time ever in history that it could happen like this, because both of the bodies were actually posed. Barry was actually wearing his glasses, and the theory was he wrapped a belt around his wife and then himself, and then he posed both his wife and himself. His legs were crossed. When someone is hanged, usually what would happen is that bone would break. They didn't hang themselves, or a murder-suicide perhaps. And I mean, like you said, it took so long for them to even check the cameras or anything. No fingerprints were done. They said there was no forced entry. and that came out to be not true. I mean, there was unlocked doors, there was an unlocked window.
And Jon brings up a super important point. It's the all-powerful hyoid bone. Yeah, I've watched enough Datelines in 2020s. Carmen, you familiar with a hyoid bone?
No.
It sits in the front of your neck, and if you are strangled, it's not a big bone, and if you are strangled 9.9 out of 10 times, that hyoid bone is going to break. As a matter of fact,
I'm so glad I just learned this, because I don't know what I would have done without knowing this.
The hyoid bone, Carm. It's a fixture of true crime. But Jon brings up a great point. It was not broken, so the assumption, I think, Jon, is that the body was placed there. Is that correct?
That's what they're thinking now. But like you said, it took over 6 weeks for them to get off of that theory. So once they get that tunnel vision that it's a murder-suicide, they tend to stick to that one theory. Obviously, you're probably going to get into this, but as the most litigated man in Canada, probably even, I would imagine, the world, I mean, he has a lot of people that want him dead. So to come out and automatically say it's a murder-suicide doesn't make sense. Plus the fact that they were about to move into a $60 million home. If I'm about to move into a new home, even if it's not $60 million, I mean, there's really no incentive for him to do this. He wasn't bankrupt. There really wasn't a motive for him to kill his wife and then kill himself, in my opinion.
And I think that's the general consensus. Carm, you raised your hand so politely.
Before I was going to ask, if it didn't happen at the swimming pool, do they know now, after all this time, where did the murders take place?
Excellent question. Do we know that, Jon?
So from what I've seen, the thinking is Honey came home first, and she was attacked in the entryway, if you will, of the home. Barry parks in the back, almost at a lower level. So he always comes in through like a back door there to his own garage. So the thinking is she was attacked first, right there in the front of the home, and then she was dragged down to the stairs, or dragged down to the pool and placed there on the lap pool. They haven't released the exact time of when they think that these murders happened, but we do know that he did come home later, and he had some stuff there, like some papers, a home inspection report that was just kind of on the ground, and his gloves. So they think that she was already dead, and that, you know, they attacked him later. Or they, or one person. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, no one does know. And Honey, Carmelo, was coming from Hanukkah shopping for her grandchildren, only to face that fate. Had just turned 70 years old. So again, there was a lot of shoddy police work, according to reporting. Now, during police canvassing, for example, they actually missed a synagogue. There's a synagogue in the neighborhood right nearby. There was a choir there that night practicing. They never even interviewed any of the participants to see, you know, if they saw something. That leads a lot of people to wonder what else, you know, they missed. Now, there's so much intrigue. Again, I can't wrap my head around why this is not getting more attention. There's someone who's become known. In the Markel case, we've got the infamous bump, right? In this case, we've got Walking Man.
Walking Man.
Yeah. Jon, you want to tell people who Walking Man is and why he could be key to solving this?
Yeah. There was the video, the only video I think they really have in this case. It showed, and this was a CCTV video of another neighbor, but they showed a man in a big coat. I think he was wearing a beanie, and you can't even tell what race he is. And he was walking, and he kind of walked past their front driveway. And the thinking was that he was around during this murder, or maybe he has something to do with it. If not, he may just be a regular neighbor that was out for a walk. But either way, this is one of the suspects that they're trying to clear off their list at this point.
You know, what's interesting about it, as you mentioned, first of all, it's Toronto, so most people are covered head to toe in December. But he had an unusual gait. He kind of lifts his right leg in an awkward, weird way when he walks. And he was in the vicinity of the Shermans' home around the time of their deaths. Now, police called him a suspect, and they asked for the public's help in identifying him. But the catch here is that they waited 4 years to do that. So they're murdered in 2017, and the police don't ask till 2021. Can you figure out why there was that kind of wait, Jon?
Like I said, the only thing I could think of was that they were pretty busy with the Bruce MacArthur case. He was a green thumb serial killer, a landscaper, and
was he the one that was killing? Was he killing gay men? Was that him?
That's correct. Yes, yeah. But other than that, I think it's just the tunnel vision. Police actually came out right when this case happened, and they said, "quote We're not looking for suspects." End quote. That's what they said. So once they put that out, they get this tunnel vision. They didn't do this on purpose, but for a billionaire couple, you would think that there would be all types of private investigators and people looking into this.
We're going to get into some of that, but like as Jon just alluded to, the family is obviously incredibly wealthy, and that allowed them to shroud details of the investigation, including them going to court to keep details of the Shermans' wills unavailable to the public, which is contrary. Usually that's public record. They kept it out of the public fray. And then in October of 2018, the family did announce a tip line and a $10 million reward for information leading to arrest. Now, Barry's son, Jonathan, who we're going to get to in a moment, is the one that claims he spearheaded that effort. And some people have accused him, even his family members, of being a suspect. But we're going to get to that, as I said, in a moment. But Jon was saying that police had kind of an interesting reaction and said that they had a suspect early on. After this happened, the Toronto police chief, Mark Sanders, at a press conference came out and says, quote, I have to be cognizant that the suspect or suspects are watching right now, Sanders said. Yeah. Jon, correct me if I'm wrong, and Carm, I want to get your take on this. I think the implication there is that the chief was basically taunting the family, saying it's probably one of you. What do you think?
I think two things that I need to mention.
Yes.
One of them is that Canada is like the gentle relative of the United States.
It's like the sweet, soothing cousin.
Exactly, the sweet, and they handle things differently. They are not so upfront and direct and sensationalistic as we are. And they are more subtle, and they are more secretive, and they are more like British.
They're the Brits.
They're like the Brits. I didn't even realize when I started.
They're refined, Carm, right?
They are refined. They are not like us. So it could be that we are having a difficulty understanding how they work, compare how the American investigators and the police work compared to them. And they are very secretive and holding the cards very close to their chest. But the fact is that this case is live. It's not dead. They're still investigating.
Active, as we say.
Active.
Live and dead, not the best thing for a murder homicide, but active is good, Carm. To you, Jon, also, I just want to mention that we love having Jon on, and we're going to have him back. But we did try to reach a lot of people who've been reporting on this case, as well as peripherally and more than peripherally involved. And when you deal with very wealthy people, you don't get a lot of cooperation. It is tough to get people to talk about this case, which is another reason, as a former media guy, it's probably not been in the media as much because the family, people close or tied to it don't really want to speak. But real quickly, Jon, because I want to get to other things as well. When the Toronto Police Chief, Mark Sanders, said that I know for a fact that some suspects could be watching, do you think that was some kind of head game where he was basically taunting the family, saying maybe it was one of you guys?
I think it may have been a bluff, honestly. I mean, there's pages of people that wanted to kill Barry, not necessarily Honey, but for instance, the architects who had built his first home that they were living in, he actually sued the architect team. And I mean, so just them alone, I mean, there's a lot of people. So I don't know if he was specifically saying, okay, maybe, we know it's one of the family members, which they have a huge incentive, obviously, especially the direct offspring. They have a big incentive to see their father and mother dead. But I honestly kind of think it was more of a bluff, because they came out at first and they said it was a murder-suicide. And now they finally recanted it 6 weeks, or I can't remember, 8 or 12 weeks later. And now they say, whoever you are, we know, and you're watching this. I mean, I don't know. It just seems more like a bluff to me.
And it's good that Jon is underscoring that Barry Sherman was, to his family, by all means, his immediate family, was a loved guy. But he was extremely litigious, and that can create enemies. Carm, you had your hand raised once again, finger raised.
No, I just made a conclusion. I just learned to improvise as I go. I think that they offer $10 million for the person to come forward.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I assume that for me, $10 million would be good. I would come forward to say that.
If you did it, or if you knew who did it. If
I knew who did it. But there are people for whom $10 million is not enough or not good enough, or they will not do it for just the measly $10 million.
You're saying it's chump change. So if it was one of the wealthy members of the family, why come forward for $10 million?
I saw like a very short clip about his partner.
Yes, we're going to get to that in a moment.
I don't say it's his partner, but I was thinking there must be people like that for whom $10 million is not the same thing as for us.
We're going to get into all that, and we don't have a lot of time, which is why I sound like on Adderall right now, which I'm not. But one of the latest things with the investigation is that Toronto police have now come out, this is just in the last couple of weeks, and say that they're pursuing leads in 5 different countries. They won't say which one. And there's actually a guy named Detective Constable. Constable's like in England, same thing. Dennis Yim. He is the lone full-time detective working on this case. So one of the family members, this is Honey Sherman's sister. Her name is Mary Shechtman. She came out and said someone was making a statement. In other words, a statement killing. She suggested the person responsible for the murders, again, was making a statement, and she believed the motive for the killings may have been motivated by religion, Carm. The Shermans were strong supporters of Israel, and Honey was very vocal about being Jewish. Shechtman says there are a lot of people of a certain ethnicity going through the house at a certain time, and Honey would use phrases that were not politically correct. What do you think we're alluding to here, Carm?
I think that I wouldn't look at that as my first option. I tell you why. If somebody murdered them for anti-Semitism, they should have thrown in at least a tiny little swastika.
Well,
you know what I mean? As a backdrop to give the message.
Jon, we can joke about this. You're not Jewish, correct?
I cannot joke about this. I can listen to you guys joke.
You can joke about this.
Ye and Kyrie Irving, man. They're it doesn't take a lot to dig up the anti-Semitism in this world. However, I feel like Mary Shechtman is off on this one. I don't think it was something anti-Semitic.
No, because there would have been some symbol. Now, something or some, what fun is it to kill them for that reason if you don't leave the message that you killed them for that reason? Then it's...
Carm, I've worked so hard on these podcasts. I'm up till 3 a.m. a lot of times. I have 3 children. And then inevitably we get here a half hour early, and then there's always an issue. We had a technical issue, so now we're racing through this. By the way,
we can skip some of it.
Subscribe to us.
We will make another.
Subscribe to us on YouTube. Drop your email in our comment section. Follow us on Insta, Facebook, and of course, you can become a patron at Patreon. We're going to start to build that up as well. Continuing on here. So the children
free of charge.
People that I never said that.
I said that.
Hey, Elon's charging $8 to get a check mark. I'll charge half of that, and you get a much better podcast and wasting your time on Twitter.
No way.
Jonathan Sherman is the son, and there's, I believe, 3 other children. Now, back to Kevin Donovan, the star investigative reporter. He has pushed in court, and he's gotten them to release mountains of information about the Shermans' business affairs and how they plan to leave their multi-billion-dollar estate to their 4 children, and of tensions among various family members. Now, when Barry and Honey Sherman were killed, majority ownership of the company went to the Sherman children. Lauren, 43, Jonathan, 35, Alexandra, 32, and Kaylin, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, 28. None of them were working at the time. But Carm, this is another reason I shouldn't be jealous and envious, because money, more problems, as the great B.I.G., Biggie Smalls once said. This is interesting. and I'll get your comment on this, Jon. So the father's request 2 weeks before his death was that Jonathan, who's the son, and a business partner named Adam Paulin pay back between $50 and $60 million that Barry had loaned them. His father, this is according to Jonathan, said that he was in a difficult financial situation, but vowed to restart the flow of cash down the road. He owed there was some kind of, Jon, I don't know if you know the details of this, but I think there was some kind of lawsuit going on, and he owed a massive sum, a few $100 million. Is that correct? Do you know about this?
I think he had a storage unit facility that he invested in. I don't think it was making any money. So I know that there were court proceedings going on with, I believe, him. I'm not sure about that, but also the cousins. That was definitely, and I think you're going to talk about that later, but the cousins were definitely in court too. But I'm not 100% sure about the immediate family members. Yeah,
the cousins or the Winter family. We're going to get to that in a moment. But Jonathan, it's interesting. So he was recently interviewed again by Kevin Donovan at the Toronto Star to give props to Donovan for digging all this up. Jonathan told Kevin Donovan, the reporter, he said what's most vexing to him is that his own sister, Alex, thinks that he was involved, which has created a rift in the family that he does not think is ever going to heal. But then Jonathan came out and said it was he who pushed for a private investigation team to get an independent pathologist to do a second set of autopsies. Now, Jonathan, who is openly gay and married to a man, said when interviewed by Kevin Donovan, and I quote here, "Had I been a straight boy, my relationship with my mother would have been perfect." He said that his being gay was something that upset Honey in earlier days, he said, but she and Barry made his husband feel welcome. Carm, what kind of strain can that put on a family? You're the lone therapist here. I know if I came to you and said that by the way, he had children, Jonathan, through surrogacy, 2 children. If I came to you and said I was gay, you would be okay with it, but you want me to have kids, correct?
Totally. But that's the only requirement.
But do you think that, was there anything going on between Honey, Barry, and this Jonathan about the fact that he was gay, or maybe he blew up and erupted?
No.
You think it's the money?
No, I think that it's not uncommon for very, very, even less wealthy, like millionaires, when the parents die, that the children fight over the money.
Lowly millionaires. How embarrassing to be a millionaire today. It's embarrassing.
Not all millionaires were created equal.
Everyone in Miami who's not a billionaire should be humiliated, should be thrown off the island.
Yeah, because they couldn't make it to the billion.
Yeah, it's pathetic. Now, Jonathan has referred to himself in an email as the heir apparent to his father's fortune, estimated to be worth between $5 and $10 billion. Now, here's another twist, Jon, that I know you mentioned earlier. We can dive into a little bit.
Let him tell the story.
Well, he doesn't know what I'm going to say. Then we'll get into it.
You're going to say the cousins.
No, not yet. 2 days before the anniversary of Barry Sherman's murder, Jonathan Sherman tells his father's longtime partner and friend, a guy named Jack Kay, that he had to leave Apotex. Now, this guy Kay helped build Apotex over 35 years. Suddenly the son comes in, Jon, right, and fires this guy who's basically the number 2. What do you make of that?
Have you seen that show Succession on HBO?
I've seen episodes. I just don't have the patience, and too many kids and too many wives and too many mothers.
You have only one wife and one mother.
But yeah,
I don't know how many girlfriends, but one wife and one.
None. I don't want my dog. No, what was your point about Succession? They're all fighting, right?
So at the funeral, the family gets up there, and of course they're distraught, but you can tell that they're not really into it. If you go back and watch that, it's almost like they're just playing the role. Now, I'm not saying that they had anything to do with it, but they did have a pretty big incentive to, or one of them at least, to complete this because of the payoff they would get. So I think that this murder was a money thing and not like a religious thing or whatever, but from who, I don't know. I mean, I would think the cousins would be more involved than Jonathan or whatever, but I do know that Barry was funding Jonathan's business ventures, and they were not successful. So maybe, I guess if he was calling in his promissory notes, like he was other people, then that would make someone think about, another option, in my opinion.
And we're going to get to cousin Kerry Winter in a moment. And again, thanks to Jon Perry of Talk Murder to Me, the podcast, for joining us. Carm, your hand is raised once again.
I think that John is absolutely right. In the Merkel case, it's one of those where it's not passion and it's not money. It's an unusual thing. But I think that...
Well, it's kind of reverse passion. It's hatred.
No, but follow the money. Follow the money is definitely a good advice. See, even though, by the way, that 35-year period associate, I saw a little episode of him sitting in a restaurant and saying how much they got along, and what a wonderful relationship.
Him and Barry, or him and Jonathan?
No, him and Barry.
Him and Barry. They built the company together, and he got the axe as a result. But what's interesting in talking about some comparisons with the Dan Markel murder case, we all know that the Adelson family hired hitmen, correct? There's no way in hell that the Sherman son was doing this himself, or that the cousin was doing this himself. They were hiring someone who could be
the guy who walks
man.
Funny.
Yes, the man with the weird gait.
Now that we solved this case, let's talk about another case.
We're not there yet, Carm.
No.
So there is a gentleman named Kerry Winter, and if you remember, Barry Sherman gets into the business with a company called Empire Pharmaceuticals, which was started by Kerry Winter's father. He is the cousin of Barry Sherman. Now, this is interesting. So there's a show in Canada on the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, The Fifth Estate. During that, an angry and bitter cousin of Barry Sherman, this guy Kerry Winter, fails a lie detector test after making unsubstantiated allegations that the former Apotex CEO was part of an aborted plot to kill his wife 2 decades ago. So this is fishy here. So Kerry Winter comes out and says, Barry Sherman wanted me to murder his wife 2 decades ago. He fails that polygraph, that it's not true. Winter and his own siblings have been locked in a protracted decade-long lawsuit that was launched in 2007 seeking some of this Apotex fortune. So their argument is, my father started the original company, which Barry built into this billion-dollar business. I want a piece of it. Now, I saw this guy on TV, Kerry Winter. I think he was a drug addict. People go through things in their life. He admitted to drug addiction. He's suspect in many ways, including possibly a suspect. Carm, you get a point.
Okay. There is a little legal point that I picked up and I like to show off. This Barry Winter's father was the brother of Sherman, of Barry Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
And he died when his children were relatively young. And he ran a company called Empire. When he died, Sherman took over the company, and legally he didn't realize that each child was entitled to 20% of the company. Now, years later, the kids come back, who are now adults, and they want their own 5%, 4 times 5 is 20% of the company. But they lose the case. And here is the interesting part. The reason they lose the case is that the money didn't come from Empire. The money did
She's
not...
She's 83, everyone. Don't worry. Empire.
I think Imperial sounds better. Empire. The money came from Empire. But immediately afterwards, Barry Sherman sold that company and proved to the courts that the money came from the new company and not from their company. So that's an interesting twist.
It gets even more interesting here, and we'll let John jump in after this. And I feel great because I got through most of my talking points here, so I can finally take a breath.
OCD.
In a wide-ranging interview with the Fifth Estate, that Canadian Broadcasting Corporation show, this, Carm, I want your take on this, and please don't grunt into the microphone for the 4 millionth time. This is an audio medium. No one wants to hear an 83-year-old lady grunting into a microphone.
No, it's not true. There are people.
That would be a weird fetish.
Okay, let's go.
Elderly women grunting into mics. It's a whole new weird fetish.
Okay.
In a wide-ranging interview with the Fifth Estate, Winter said he told his psychiatrist, Carmela, your husband is a retired psychiatrist, that in the past he had fantasized about murdering Barry Sherman. This is a direct quote. I would talk about killing Barry, and it was very graphic, Winter said. He would come out of the parking lot of Apotex, and I'd be hiding behind a car, and I just decapitated him. I wanted to roll his head down the parking lot, and I'd sit there and wait for the police. It's a lot of anger, Carm.
Yeah,
I sort of envy the anger.
Kind of angry.
I mean, in all seriousness, Carm, if you were an investigator, is it too obvious, or do you think this guy could be, a potential suspect? Obviously potential, but do you think...
They can all be suspects.
But I'm saying, is this fantasy of his enough to push him to the front of the line in your...
no.
Law enforcement expertise.
I saw this guy.
Yeah.
He's too obvious.
He's too obvious, right? John, what do you think? Do you think that he is too obvious, this guy?
Well, like you said, he has a lot of anger. And one thing he didn't have was an alibi for where he was that night. He definitely has a lot of hatred for Barry. He said he was at a cocaine addiction meeting or something like that. And then later that night, he went home and watched Netflix. I think he told CBC. Now, he actually, like you mentioned, he failed the polygraph test. I don't know if you mentioned that yet, but he took a polygraph test and failed it. And then when they said, hey, would you like to take another one on the basis of, can we ask you if you are the killer? He said no, which is, that does not look good for him.
So, John, anything else? These are kind of the salient points. What are we missing here that we should be talking about? Anything?
It had to be somebody that knows the family, because the only security cameras in the home were in the lap room where their bodies were found. However, those cameras were not hooked up. If you were to go and kill a billionaire, you would imagine that they would have cameras all over their home. I think my take is that it has to be someone very close to the family, or at least knows their routine. And that's just my opinion. But there are a lot of other people, including a lot of big pharma companies that he was steamrolling at the time or threatening at the time. And I also know that he recently bought a fentanyl company. The book I read for this case, I think it's called Billionaire Murders. It's a really good book, but she actually talks about the Hells Angels, the biker gang does all the fentanyl things. So even them, even that group could be a suspect. But, the most litigated man in Canada, himself always saying, I'm just waiting for someone to knock me off. And it happened.
It is a true murder mystery. This is a case that we are going to hop on frequently. It's amazing to me that we're 5 years in and there has not been an arrest. This December 15th will be 5 years of the murders of Barry and Honey Sherman. His name is Jon Perry. He's one of the hosts of the Talk Murder to Me podcast. Where do we find it? On all the usual... all the usual.
Yeah, and YouTube too. We do the live streams every Saturday. We live stream our episodes, and
Is it one episode a week?
We do 2 or 3. Like this week, I'm putting out 3 episodes. We just did a big. I did a dive on Ed Gein for Halloween.
Every Saturday, you stream live.
Every Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yes, on YouTube.
Awesome. Are all of you in Charleston, or are you in different places, the hosts?
Yeah, we're all here in Charleston. So one of the hosts is my wife, who is also Jewish, and I still can't make jokes like you guys can. Definitely not. But
I think you could. I think you could. You qualify.
Next time,
I give you my blessing.
Hey, next time we'll bring you and the wife on. We really appreciate you doing this. I hate to run so quick. This is probably our shortest podcast, but we got everything out that we needed.
Ask him again to come back.
We are going to come back, but now we say in the other case we're following, it's justice for Dan Markel. Here, it's got to be justice for Barry and Honey Sherman. No one should be killed, even if you're suing the crap out of people, right? No one should be murdered for that. So, John, absolute pleasure. Thank you for doing this, and we'll call on you soon. Are you willing to come back and do this again?
I'd love this. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome,
I'm
man.
here. Yeah.
You're the man. All right. Love you, America. We'll be back.
Yes, and thanks for being on our show.